You were coming up with the ideas, getting them into English, and then translating them into French. And he said, you have to go straight from the concept of what you want to say to the French. Get the English out of the middle of it.
Welcome to Classical Etc. You're in the studio with Memoria Press.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Classical Etc. I'm Jessica Aboud, and we are the core four this morning, Paul, Martin, and Tanya. Welcome back, everybody.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Good to be here.
We're in the thick of winter. Does everybody have some good winter reading that they're doing?
Yes.
What is it?
Just finished Hamlet, which
Did you
gave
Oh,
me.
yeah, tell me.
Yes, I loved it.
Yeah.
I didn't think the first of it was all that good.
Yeah.
But man, by the time you get to the actual child dying in the plague and the mother's attempting to save her child and the whole grief thing, and then Hamlet at the end, it's just, I think it's beautiful. But it bothered me so much because I think it is so well written about what a mother would feel like at the death of her child. I don't think I can see the movie, but I want to see the Hamlet scenes at the end of the movie.
Yeah.
So I think I'm just going to wait till it goes on streaming and just watch that. I just don't think I can emotionally sit in a theater and watch that movie, but it was beautiful. And I read Hamlet. I was going to read Hamlet after, but I decided to read it alongside.
Oh.
So I was reading them both at the same time. And then, so I finished that, and now I'm halfway through North and South by Elizabeth
fun.
Gaskell, which I've read.
Yeah.
But it's for the Crescent Hill book group.
Okay.
Yeah. And I'm loving it so much more the second time. I just think sometimes just maturity makes a huge difference in what you get out of a book.
Yes, that's right.
And I'm really enjoying revisiting some books, even though, as I said before, it makes me feel guilty because I've read that book, so I should be reading something new. But
and even season of life, I think something will hit you differently.
That's true.
Yeah. Okay. How about everybody else?
I finished Trust by Hernan Diaz that Fleur recommended.
Oh.
And
I thought you said you didn't.
I didn't really like it. I mean, it's an interesting literary foray, but I don't like literary forays.
The format?
Because the first third is like a novel in its own right. And then the second third, without explanation. Now, I was listening to it. I don't know if it would have been clearer in a text.
But you asked her, and she said...
I did. She said it was fine to listen to. But like the second third, I was confused as to what was going on because all of a sudden it shifted to an autobiography. And then the third is the ghostwriter of the autobiography telling her story of writing the autobiography and what she's found out to be true versus what the autobiography said. And so it's sort of like this meta critique of like, do novels tell truth? Do autobiographies tell truth? No, everybody's trying to tell their own story. I wasn't really a fan. But the story is engaging, I will tell you. I mean,
so you and Fleur could have a conversation about it.
Yes, Fleur can absolutely call me up and we can talk about it. But but Fleur refused to tell me what she thought about it before I read it, which is probably good practice.
Right.
Yeah.
And so now this is my first statement of I didn't really like it. And for these reasons, but...
So Fleur's one-on-one right now because I loved Rumor Garden.
But I will say, not that Fleur is one-on-one. I mean, I didn't like it, but I think it will be an interesting conversation for me to have with her.
Yeah.
And so in that sense, it's worth something.
Absolutely. Well, that's why she recommended it. I think she wanted somebody else's opinion about it because maybe she didn't know what to think.
Maybe what she recommended to me was a book I'd already read.
Oh, well, there you go then.
Well, look it up and come back and report to us.
How about for you? Are you reading anything? Not Fleur's book,
I'm trying, I sometimes can't get to what I want to read because I'm reading other stuff for work or whatever.
I know.
And so I was trying to get back. So I realized the only way I'm going to do this is to just do some shorter readings in 3 or 4 things. So I feel like I'm covering something, right? So I went back to my old regime of doing this. So I'm reading just about 5 pages out of Edith Hamilton's mythology, which is wonderful. It's really good. And there's usually sections in there that are short enough where it doesn't take long to read them. And then Plutarch's Lives, I don't think you could read that book cover to cover. It is really dense, right? So you need to read it in shorter snippets. Peter Kreif's Practical Theology, which is just short little lessons. I mean, little 2-page things. And they're just, Peter Kreif is a wonder, really, in terms of explaining things simply. And
I haven't heard of that one.
Oh, my wife thought we carried it, and I don't think we carry it.
No.
It is. We need to carry that book. It is.
You
really
tell me
good.
that all the time about everything you read.
I know
It is true.
And then we're going to be doing Portrait of a Lady for the Foundations podcast, the college's Foundations podcast.
Oh, that's fun.
And so I had read about half of that, so I went back and started reading that again. Henry James.
Yeah.
So that's what
I need to reread Henry James. I want to reread Trollope.
Oh, totally. I mean, there's a whole class of those British authors. You mentioned Elizabeth Gaskell, who I could just
live
the
in
rest
them.
of my
Just
life.
live in them.
I could just read those
me
authors.
too.
And they read enough books so that you could spend the rest of your life reading them.
Have you read George MacDonald's fiction?
I have not.
Well, you should try that too. It's Trollope-like.
Is it? Okay.
Yes, but it's always about a rector or a vicar or something. But they're theological, but they are also really good fiction written in a Trollope style.
And a lot of people don't know Trollope. I mean, these days it seems like.
I
Boy,
know. What a loss.
Well, those old sort of pastoral England,
yes,
that take place in the mid 19th century, late 19th century. Jane Eyre and Jane Austen and Jane Eyre's the novel, but those authors. I couldn't think of the
Bronte.
The author, Charlotte Bronte, and Trollope and Gaskell. Those are the most wonderful. It's because it's like, here's this world which I just want back.
Right.
And I just won't go back there.
I don't know that I want to go back there. Lots of misogyny.
Not as a woman.
Yeah.
No, I just read in North and South where she wasn't going to attend her mother's funeral because women didn't go because they lost their emotions and were disruptive. Do I want to live there? No.
I don't know.
But I do love reading about it.
Yeah.
Well,
I think you should just for your own good.
She convinced her father to let her go to her mother's funeral.
I don't even have a comment to that. On to the show. Today's episode is going to be a little different. Is somewhat of a mailbag of sorts. Over the last few months, we've released a few episodes on Latin, and those episodes generated a lot of thoughtful comments and even some criticisms. We received an email from a listener named John. He wrote us and asked whether we would be willing to respond to those criticisms, and we thought that was a great idea. So today's episode is a chance for us to more specifically engage with those disagreements charitably about how Latin should be learned and taught. Classical education certainly isn't a monolith, and neither is Latin pedagogy. The disagreements that we're responding to are between people who really love Latin and care about it. So we want to be thoughtful in how we respond, and we're going to work through the questions together. So let's get started. Paul, I wanted to start with you. There's a debate that's emerged about which aspects of Latin language learning are most important. So I want to ask you, what is the ultimate goal of learning a language? Is it, or Latin specifically, is it grammar? Is it using it in daily life? Because that could really change the format and the...
Yes, there is no use for Latin in your daily life currently. I mean,
speak for yourself.
Okay,
I guess.
okay. Maybe I
feel
should.
like some of the comments.
I should speak for myself because I actually do have friends that went to a Latin immersion program and they made friends from all over the world, and the only way they can communicate is through Latin. Mm-hmm. So, okay, there is some very limited,
but for the majority of our students,
yes,
they're not going to go there,
right? But I mean, to kind of zoom out, not just Latin, I think some of the comments, what they were getting at is when somebody hears us promote the way we think one ought to learn Latin, it it really is geared towards a reading mastery of the language. It is, but when you talk about language mastery, there's a level beyond that where you can think and dream and pray in the language, right? And I remember when I was immersed in French, and I had studied Latin and Greek and Spanish before moving to a French-speaking area. And I was in an international community, and there was a Mexican friend I had who he spoke Spanish and English. He was learning French alongside me, and he stopped me one day and he said, "Paul," he said, "when you were speaking French, it's very clear that in your head you were coming up with the ideas, getting them into English, and then translating them into French." And he said, "You have to go straight from the concept of what you want to say to the French. Get the English out of the middle of it, right?" And I was hesitant because I was like, I think I'm going to form bad habits. He said, "Don't worry, the French, they'll correct you right away." And that leap actually I mean, I had studied Latin for, what would that have been? 1 of 5, almost 10 years. I started like in 3rd grade, and this is in college. This is late college. And I, like, that was a language leap for me. All of a sudden to realize, oh, I can go from concept to a different language than my maternal tongue, right? And I think that's what a lot of the commenters are getting at is like, if you're trying to learn a language, that's the pinnacle. The pinnacle is that you can dream in this. And I got to a point where I was dreaming in French. I dreamt in Spanish. I dreamt in Italian. And it's disconcerting. It really is. It's a little like, what's going on here? Like, have I lost my identity? I'm no longer an English speaker. But it's a beautiful thing, right? And I got to the point where I was correcting the grammar of native French speakers, and so, but that goal, that high pinnacle for Latin is a different thing. I think if you've got sort of a college level, voluntary Spanish program, what level do you want to get them to? You want to get them to that level where they can think in it, right?
Because they're going to be conversing with actual people speaking Spanish.
Correct. And there's a high likelihood that they may take that knowledge and go live in a Spanish speaking area, right? Or something like that, or have a day job where that comes in every day. Whereas with Latin, like when we're starting with 2nd graders to learn Latin, and there's not a distinction here of like this child's coming from a classicist family, and so they're probably going to use this every day when they get older, versus a child who's coming from a parent who's one parent's a doctor and one's an engineer, and they're probably not going to be doing that every day. We're not making that distinction. We want everybody to start learning Latin, start mastering things. And where are you going to start in 2nd or 3rd grade? You're going to start with the basics of the grammar and the vocab, right? And we don't have teachers that are, we're not going to spend 2 or 3, we're not going to spend 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th grades like the Jesuits did back in the 1500s in full immersion in Latin, where that was all they did all day. It was Latin and then maybe a little bit of religion, right? For 2 or 3 years until they were fluent in Latin. So then the rest of their education progressed, right? Like that's our current society does not hold that up as a possibility.
What do you think about the idea, having a Spanish background? Somebody recently told me that she grew up in a Spanish-speaking home, and so English was her 2nd language, but not really, because she grew up in America. So she was speaking fluently, really, in both. Studied in American schools all of her life, and now can speak Spanish fluently, but feels like she's struggling, like she needs to practice reading Spanish. Like it's a totally separate, that shocked me really, because I guess I think I can read in English and I can speak in English, and she can speak in Spanish, but she's having to practice fluency in reading in Spanish.
Yes.
What is that disconnect?
And it goes the other way too. I know people who can, like if you've academically studied, say, French, some people, can read in it, but they cannot converse in it.
Correct.
It goes both ways,
Correct.
interestingly.
And that was a leap for me. Like I had been learning to read in French,
Right.
and understand the grammar. And the leap for me was getting to a point where I was working on conversing, and I could converse, but it was very hesitant. It was very.
But you were
stilted.
doing it like you read.
Right.
You were reading in your head.
And it's
The
much more
sentences were being
organic
formed in English.
That's right.
And you were translating
That's right.
them.
Because when we're speaking, none of us are actually intentionally formulating grammatical constructions in our head as we're having this conversation. It's just coming out. And some of the critiques we're getting on Latin is sort of like they're saying that's the level we should get to in Latin, and that should be our goal. That's a wonderful goal, but that's not the appropriate goal for the vast majority of people.
Or realistic, maybe.
Or realistic. That's right. And so, absolutely, I think people, that happens all the time. And I saw this in French-speaking Canada, the part I was in, where you had people growing up in bilingual homes. And I remember I had this American next to me from South Carolina, and we had, I don't know, we were around some like middle schoolers, and they were going back and forth from French to English. And he goes, "It's not fair. They, can speak French easily. They don't have to think about it." And I said, "Thomas, the reality is you know French grammar better than they do. You currently still have to think about it, but they cannot write a proper sentence." And that happens all the time, especially in bilingual areas, because you will have one language that is that child spends most of their day in, or that's what all the cultural stuff is they're exposed to or whatever. They'll have another one they speak, but if you ever ask them to write or to read that, a lot of times they don't put the effort has not been put into to master the grammatical part of that language.
It makes sense, but I feel stupid. Like I should have recognized that, but it was like a light bulb going on for me. I'd never recognized that there was this total difference in speaking it and being able to read it.
But you think about illiterate people.
I was going to say it's a spectrum.
Oh, they can speak,
It's
but
such
not read.
a spectrum.
Right.
Literacy or fluency is a spectrum.
Well, and this is the thing. So if you know a language, you speak it very well, and you haven't actually studied it, it's hard to study the grammar of your own language. English, not only is English dicey in terms of grammar anyway, but if you know to speak English, it doesn't convert right into knowing the grammar of that you're using every day.
Not at all.
And that's to me, that's part of the educational beauty of Latin is you don't know it. And in order to translate it, you have to, have a grammar knowledge to do that. And so it forces you to learn the grammar. So educationally, you can see that not knowing it would have an advantage. And plus the fact that it is a very grammatical language. But, I learned Latin by teaching it because we just started a classical school. Nobody knew how to do it. I said, well, I'll learn it. So we did that. And I got up to the point where I could teach Cicero. Now that was many years ago, and I don't have that same knowledge now. And I just use it now for the daily church gospel reading. And and again, doing that, I read the reading in the Latin, and it forces me, because of its unfamiliarity, to really look at what's being said. So just reading that same gospel passage in English and reading it in Latin is a completely different experience. And you see things by reading it in this less familiar language that you would never see in the English. You can't blaze through it. You can't just go, you got to look at every single word, and you're looking at the structure of the sentence. To me, that's a helpful Bible study tool.
Sure. But to get back to the critique, I think the critique is saying that, in fact, your competency in Latin should get to a level such that you are just blazing through it because you're not having to think about the grammatical constructions.
Right. And I actually, that's what I would like to be eventually. Again, I never knew it well enough to think in it, right? But getting there, this is one of the things that getting there is half the value of it.
Right.
You know?
Right.
Yeah.
And so I'd like to get there someday, but in the process, I'm really enjoying this time that I don't know it well because I'm seeing things I wouldn't otherwise see.
Right. And
I feel like you'd be in better shape if you concentrated on being able to think well in English first.
Love
You
that.
think so?
All right.
Never mind.
Gonna be the referee
Have I
here.
left you speechless?
Yeah.
Go ahead, Paul. What were you
Wow.
going to say?
Yeah.
I was
I mean,
also-
if you want to try it sometime, just read my book on logic that I wrote.
Oh, yeah. Can't get through that. Can't get through that.
So, and maybe this is a later question. I can't remember these questions we have coming at us, but Martin talking about the way you learn Latin is teaching you grammar. I think you've got you have people that go. Some people say grammar only. Some people say grammar first. Some people say immersion only, right? And some people are a hybrid or whatever. And I think that's where if somebody's trying to learn Latin, trying to teach say second or third graders Latin, the way under the assumption that they're young enough they can learn Latin the same way they've learned English, we're just going to immerse them in it. First of all, you're not immersing them in it because you're only spending maybe an hour every other day, with them. That's not enough immersion. But for two, like that sort of method is exactly misses the point of what you just said, right? You're not actually teaching them grammar. You're trying to just get them to sort of pick it up in the same way the Spanish speaker could speak it, but not actually read it. That's kind of the what you would get with an extreme immersion approach in Latin.
And we are going to touch on that.
Okay.
Definitely. And I think this is a good time to transition into some of maybe the nuts and bolts of teaching Latin. And Martin, I wanted to ask you, because we get a lot of comments about what we put into our curriculum and what we don't. So because there's some disagreement there on some of the principles in the curriculum, particularly for beginners, is it beneficial sometimes to avoid teaching all of the aspects of Latin from the beginning? Like, for example, someone mentioned macrons, and we don't use those in the beginning.
Right. Yeah. I mean, in most of the things you read, I didn't see macrons in a lot of the things I read. Now in Cicero there was, I think, but I and try typing it on your.
With the macron.
and try finding an old Roman inscription with macrons on it.
That's right. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Yeah. There's a historical argument on that too. Yeah. Well, I don't really know exactly which. I mean,
and maybe another way to say it is just because we don't immediately introduce it doesn't mean we dismiss it entirely.
That's
because they
correct.
do come back to some of the things we don't teach them in the earliest
That's
stages.
Yeah.
We're teaching them in an age appropriate way, and our best, time on task is very important to us. And it's not good time on task to ask a third grader to memorize not only how to spell a Latin word, what it means, but also where to put a macron. Now we do use them for the ablative singular noun,
where it's an identifier.
Just right, just because there are several words that have the exact same ending, and it just identifies that one specifically as ablative. But
well, and in church Latin, you don't see much of it anyway. At least I don't. And I literally never remember a time when I needed the macron to know anything about what it was being said.
But they do in our translation courses. They do use macrons.
Yes. Well, and it gets more important when you get to poetry and that sort of thing. But and it's important when you're composing, but it's not. I mean, you're commenting about church Latin, right? I mean, what the vast majority of people will use macrons for is to know where the accent falls. And what church Latin has decided to do is we're just going to put the accent if it's anywhere other than the penultimate syllable. If it's anywhere other than the second last syllable, we're going to put the accent on it, right?
And you do learn that in even like first or second form, right? The penultimate. I remember learning that.
Yes.
So children are taught how to, like the formula for what a common, how they can kind of default to saying it out loud.
Right.
To saying it correctly.
Right. But there are rules with regards to long vowels and long syllables, and there's a distinction there, and how you know a syllable is long, and all of that sort of thing. And there's no way a third grader is going to understand any of that.
Right. I mean,
Right.
we struggle even with the beginning lesson on punctuation, not punctuation, pronunciation is, it just is like these complicated rules about how to pronounce the letters and the digraphs. And so we tell people just move on, just move on. It's not the most important thing.
Mhm.
And so you could hear several different pronunciations throughout our school of various words because our teachers aren't classically educated and they do the best they can, and we give general rules. But in the end, we're training them to read Latin.
Mhm. And our context is we are teaching children.
We are, but
don't
people
know-
are
yeah.
nervous about pronunciation because they want to pronounce the words correctly. But what is correct?
Right. Well, I mean, and the thing is pronounce them consistently, right? That's the key part. But I mean, even within classics communities, within church communities, there's Henley actually. It's very fascinating because Henley's got a pronunciation guide at the beginning, and at the back he's got like 2 or 3 more.
Oh,
Because it's not just like we normally simplify it to ecclesiastical versus classical. No, there's like the ecclesiastical Italian version, the ecclesiastical continental version. There's the, he calls them different things, but it was really interesting to me when Ratzinger became the Pope, when Benedict XVI, and I was used to a more like Italian church Latin, based on like how I've been taught to sing and this kind of stuff. And then I started remember watching him in a mass and he pronounced some Latin. I'm like, that is not the Latin I know. Right.
He was German.
He was
right?
German.
Yeah.
Right. And so we get tied up in knots within our own English culture about how we're going to pronounce this. You go to a different culture in language like Spanish or French or German or Italian, they all pronounce it differently because their mouths form things differently than ours do. And so pronunciation cannot be that big of a deal, given that sort of wider context. Also, like, since I'm on my soapbox, the order of the cases is different based on whether you're a Spanish speaker or a French speaker or an English speaker.
or in Britain versus America.
Yes. And so that was when I learned that, when I was teaching some students Latin in French. And I was like, let's recite. And I was like, you're doing what? I mean, that was an exciting moment.
That's always nice as a teacher when when the students get one up on you, when you literally don't know what's going on.
Yeah.
I've been there too.
Yeah.
Paul, you mentioned the concept of immersion, and I want to come back to that because we get a lot of comments on our approach in regards to immersion. So does a grammar-based approach mean we do no immersive experiences? Are they opposed to each other?
You asked Paul, but you're looking at me.
I would, first of all, I would say no. Like we say grammar. And yet in our books, like we're telling them, use the word surgite, right? To tell them to stand up, right? Like that is actually an immersive practice,
because
right?
they don't know the grammar for surgite.
Right.
That it's a
Yeah, it's like we're using this a little bit in order to like get you to feel it, but we're not asking the student to sit there and compose to us with grammatical concepts that he doesn't know. Right?
That's the key is we're starting with young students, and it's the same way that we teach phonics. We don't ask our students to read any letters of the alphabet that we haven't taught, which is why First Start Reading has silly little stories in it, because if you've only taught half the alphabet, you're really limited in the number of words you can use. Our Latin is exactly the same way. We don't ask students to translate any grammar form we haven't taught or any vocabulary word that we haven't taught. So basically, we have form drills. We have simple little sentences, but they only have the tenses we've taught, the vocabulary we've taught, the adjectives that we've taught. So they are stilted and they don't necessarily connect to each other. And I think people think translation is just like a story, but we are translating. We're only translating what they know, which does simplify it.
Yes, and that I think is sort of like the big difference between when we say grammar first versus an immersion approach. The big difference is this very thing. We're not asking them to do something that we haven't shown them and taught them how to use. Now, I will say that Henley, I wish I had the page number on top of my head, but I don't. It's within the first 100 pages, has a page in the first year book on how to read Latin. And I love this. I use this with my fourth form students all the time, because he basically says, when you go read a paragraph of Latin, what you need to do at this level is the first thing you need to do is read it in Latin. Do not try to translate it. Do not try to come up with the English. Try to see if you can just understand what's going on. And then he says, then go back through it a second time and do the same thing. But if you need to pause and slow down in order to see how that verb connects to this noun or whatever, you can do that, but still never applying an English word to any of those Latin words. And then go back a third time and go through it detailed to make sure that, if anything you didn't understand, you know exactly what's going on. And that sort of practice is getting them from the stilted reading of like having to parse everything out to a more fluent mastery of the language where I can go directly to the Latin in my head sort of practice. But that's just a pedagogical practice you can start doing when they get to like the paragraph level.
Yes, and that's what we're doing in our translation classes. Is a student is always reading the Latin before they ever begin to translate it, to actually start breaking it down into little pieces. But I do think for the immersion method, I do think I have tutored a Latin student who was using an immersion method, and it was a nightmare. And it was not the best use of time. It took us like hours to do one paragraph because he didn't know any of the grammar forms, didn't know any of the vocabulary. So I was literally teaching every verb tense to him as we went just to get through one paragraph. But he wasn't learning it because then we would move on to the next verb tense.
Kind of choppy.
And so, yes, I mean, he wasn't retaining anything. I thought, this is awful. But I can see that a college student going in to take Latin, I think I, as an adult, could work my way through that. And I would have a paragraph and I knew I don't know the grammar form. I could look it up. I could learn it much easier. Part of this is age of the student. And so people, I think a lot of times when people criticize the grammar first method, they're not thinking about a third grader.
And I'm glad you said that, because I do think it's worth saying for an adult who, just for personal enrichment, wants to join maybe a Latin conversation club or whatever it might be, just they want to pick it up. They want to study it, work through some workbooks and go to a group where they try to speak it, or there's something enriching they want to participate in. That's one thing. But a third grader learning grammar is another. And so the contexts are very different. So then the vehicles or the outcomes might be different.
That's right. And you're immersing yourself now as an adult.
I mean, I was just thinking when you were talking that doing the Bible readings, that there is that point at which, you're going along word by word and looking for the verb and all that stuff. And then you realize you're into it a little bit and you just read that whole sentence and you didn't even think about the English. You understood what that sentence said. And that is, that's like, oh, well, I just actually read it, not translated it.
Yeah.
And it's just, but how do I get to, I just read it? By translating it first. And
many times.
Many
word
times.
by word.
Yeah.
Parsing.
But that is a different skill. Reading it without translating it is a different skill than composing. Right? I mean, that's a very different thing.
The generative process is different than...
Right. Yeah. And that's always the hardest thing. That's the one you leave for last when you're teaching it.
That's right.
Well, and that's why, right? Like the Harvard speech that they do every year in Latin, right? Like, that's why that's like the cream of the crop because this person got to a point where they could compose,
in Latin.
and also be able to declaim it, right? Like with meaning. And so, that's a very different, that's a different skill altogether that most students don't get to. And also,
but they used to.
Well, in the Henley program, you are translating from English to Latin.
Yes.
For example.
They do. We do some of that in the forum series and stuff too.
Yeah.
But it's one thing to have a text and then have to translate it versus sit down and write me a Latin paragraph, right? Like that's a different kind of thing too. But
those exercises where you do have not to translate the Latin into English, but the English into Latin, those are always, of course, the hardest exercise. Now it's basic composition, right? You're doing with a sentence. I mean, but you have the model there, and and then you got to look at all that Latin you're doing. Was the ending on those words right? That's where the rubber meets the road in Latin teaching. When you really know your grammar, is when you are able to translate from English to Latin.
But when you do a composition course, are you literally writing it from your head into Latin, or are you writing it in English and then translating it into Latin?
I think the pinnacle of it is the first one.
Yeah.
Right. You're going to start at the second one, right? Where you're going to have an English, let's get this into Latin, because you do have to, once you start dealing with different languages, you realize that, I mean, there are starkly different constructions that are native to different languages.
And
right?
different authors.
Yes. But I'm just saying, like, the way you might phrase something in English, you can't just take that word for word and put that into Latin, even if you're trying to say, like, let me put that in the right case or whatever. Sometimes it's like, no, they just wouldn't ever phrase it that way. And so you have to come around to a different
Which means you have to know a lot even to know that.
Yeah. I mean, that's the pinnacle of language learning is to be able to do that. And that's why, I mean, you go back to, you read educational authors over the past couple hundred years that are promoting the classical tradition. And one of their major things is mastery of language, not only Latin, but multiple languages. Like, go get 5, 6, 7 languages. Why? Because it makes your mind so flexible in how you want to communicate a concept, because, German's going to do it very differently than the French, than the English, than, the Japanese. Like, it's all
right.
Like, that exercise of getting to the point where you could do that is actually training in and of itself.
Oh, sure. Because some languages are more like story-based. Some are really precise, like French has like a precision. And then you think about it, it's just a different way to think.
Yes.
Well,
totally
and Arabic is more story-based, I think.
Poetic. It's a very beautiful
Yes.
language, but that's interesting. Well, but one of the last, I think, categories of criticism that we get when we talk about how we teach Latin is something that, Paul, you touched on, but we didn't dive into. A lot of people tell us, well, but I want to learn Latin the way the ancients did. And you brought up the Jesuits. I'd be curious to know, clearly Latin was taught differently centuries ago than it is now. That's something that it changes over time because our historical context, the format of things just changes. We don't live in a culture anymore where being immersed in Latin constantly for, like you said, the children who for years learned hours and hours of Latin a day, that just isn't where we are now. But if someone says, I want to learn Latin the way the ancients did, maybe this is a question for all of you. What do you say to that?
Well, I don't typically put the Jesuits in the ancient category because they're from the 1500s. So the question is, what do we mean by ancient, right?
Yeah.
Because if you're saying, if you go back to the ancient Romans, well, then your parents have to be speaking Latin every day to you. And that's
true.
Going to be your maternal tongue. And then you're going to get a Greek tutor if you're well enough that's going to teach you Greek.
Who probably has a stick to help you.
Oh my!
There's a lot of...
Yeah.
Ancient practices we don't do anymore, hopefully.
But I think you're right that probably the question is more geared towards when Latin is not the native tongue, how did people learn it? Now, first of all, if we're talking about 500 years ago, Latin is much more prevalent, right? Every week you're going to church, or more often than once a week you're going to church, and that's the language you're hearing, right? So you would have, in some ways, been immersed from the get-go as a child going to church every week. Besides the fact that any learned individual in your environs would speak Latin, right? And so
and that's the case up until fairly historically recently, even in the United States, like 19th century.
Right. And so the idea for the Jesuits in the 1500s, and you can go read their plan of studies. It's called the Ratio Studiorum. I mean, their plan was they weren't taking kids earlier than third grade, and then they were evaluating based on how much Latin did you know, and if you didn't know any Latin or you knew very little, right, the next 2 or 3 years, you're spending about 6 hours a day on Latin. That was the only thing you were studying. You weren't studying geography. You weren't studying literature. You were studying Latin, to the point that in a year or 2 or 3, depending on your progress, then you would get moved into a plan of studies where you were then studying literature or geography or whatever.
Because you were caught up.
Latin. You were caught up at that point, but those classes were actually happening in Latin. And so even if all you mastered was sort of some sort of grammar-based thing, which if I remember correctly, they say I think the first year could be taught in the native tongue, and then after that, those classes were held in Latin.
That so appeals to my structured mind. If I could have just gone to school and had one subject and just immersed myself in it for years.
Really?
That sounds like you.
No variety.
Doesn't that sound great? That sounds good to me.
Really?
Sounds very Tanya.
Yes.
Well, yes, but my question would be, it'd be fascinating to put a poll out. How many parents would spend the money to send their child for, let's say, 3 years, where the one thing guaranteed that you can come out with in like 7th grade is that they can speak Latin? Today,
Just a different time.
it's just a different time.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And I mean, it'd be great if we could get back to that. Maybe that's in our great-grandchildren's generation. I don't know. But at this point, that's just
it's lost.
It's lost.
We also can't do math like we used to.
Oh,
That
goodness.
is true.
I mean, we've lost a lot.
Isn't that true about just about everything
It
in
is.
education?
Right. And the question is, if we go around and telling people you should learn Latin, and we present this paradigm that you have to learn Latin this way, where you've got to be able to think in it and compose in it, and how many people are ever going to take you up on it, right? In the
They feel like it's a fail before it ever begins.
Right.
Or it's not accessible at
That's-
all.
that's
So
right.
if
And
it's
so-
not accessible, why start?
right, and in the project of trying to recapture what we said where we've lost, you got to start where you're at and make one step forward.
And also to know that there are, we haven't even touched on the many benefits of Latin that are aside from being able to translate or being able to speak in Latin. There are so many other benefits to Latin just as a exercise for your brain.
I was just in a conversation about that the other day with somebody, and that exercise. I mean, you're trying to. Your ideal critical thinking skills program is going to make your mind move in every different direction. It's like doing calisthenics. You're going to use every muscle you can, right? You have mental muscles, and I don't think all this talk about thinking skills. I can't think of anything better than Latin for doing this. At least on the language side. I mean, obviously, you're doing somewhat similar things, but in a different context in math.
Right.
If you didn't,
But on
does your school have a critical thinking skill? Yes, Latin and math. That's what our thinking skills program is.
And demanding in those, right?
Yes.
Like it's not just we're going to diddle around with
That's
it.
right.
Like we
That's
are
right.
we are going to spend. I don't know what are our 5th graders doing on the math time sheets? How much? How fast can
They're
they do?
doing 400. They can do 400 problems in less than a lot of them less than 2 minutes, but generally less than 5.
I mean, that is just unbelievable.
I mean, they've mastered them by then, but then we have to work on long multiplication, long division, fractions. There's a lot more by then, but we have by then really mastered those facts.
And when you're doing, when you're working with verbs, tense, voice, mood, when you're doing nouns, case, gender, number, and all those are just working just like this. And I can't think of any better training and thinking skills than that.
Well, to those of you who watched and commented on our Latin videos, thank you. We appreciate it. And especially to John, who wrote us and asked for us to respond. We were happy to do so and glad for the nudge to keep the conversation going. Our hope is that this invites even more conversation about the joy and the benefit of learning Latin. So thank you for joining us, and we'll be back next time. Thanks for joining us today on Classical Etc. by Memoria Press. If you like what you heard, please like, subscribe, or share this episode or comment. We love to hear your questions and your comments. If you want to learn more about Memoria Press, please go to memoriapress.com. This has been Classical Etc. We're so glad you joined us, and we'll see you next time.